Morning, everyone. This is Lana Peterson. I'm with Ruth, my sidekick at Homebirth South Africa. And today we're recording with another mama who's had two home births, Zayaan Khan. And we are really enjoying recording these sessions with people who have responded and sharing them. And the response has really been amazing. People are really resonating with what's being shared, and I really enjoyed the little pearls of wisdom that each person has brought to light when sharing their experiences. So Zayaan, I'm going to hand over to you to introduce yourself and share your story. Thank you.
Thank you, Lana. Thank you, Ruth, for having the space for us, because it's remarkable how many people are birthing at home and have been birthing at home. Yeah, my name is Zayaan. I work primarily as an artist around food and land and seed, and as a researcher, and I think a lot about kind of the nexus of those topics. And one of the spaces that's pertinent to our discussion today is the traditions and the relationships that we have with land specifically, and the ways in which those relationships and knowledge systems have been severed or destroyed or lost or broken, and what work it is to reclaim that and to revive that. And that is, you know, if you think about land, it's about everything that we engage with. And so birth is such a huge formative part of that. But birth is not something that we're engaging with every single day, like we do with food and other aspects of land. And so often it gets left out of the conversation about these relationships with land, and also you know, like the inherent losses that we face in the general medical insurance world. So all of those things have been kind of taken away from us. They're behind these kind of closed walls and so on. And so because of that, and because, you know, as part of that, as a family, we never had insurance. And so we weren't really going to go private, and in any case I didn't want to be in the hospital for such a sacred time, and so we chose home birth as the way to do it. And yeah, should I just launch right into the stories and right into what I wish to share? And I think in my community, this is something not done. So I faced a lot of resistance within my immediate family, which was really, in hindsight and in beautiful open discussions with them, based around fear. Like direct quotes being, "No, Zayaan, you have to have your first baby in the hospital. You can do the other babies at home, but you have to have the first one in hospital." And so there was a lot of kind of holding space for other people in my autonomy and in my decision-making process. My baby daddy, my husband, didn't have, he was in full support from the get-go, because, you know, it was me going through it. And so kind of stepped up into all the ways that he could be present and support this process, which was beautiful and wonderful. And it got us to really talk about the kind of fears that you may not think about. Being conditioned in our cultures also, it's fears around gender discrimination for, you know, future baby decision makings that they have in their life and the ways that they choose to live their lives. And so all that stuff coming out, which is really wonderful. But ultimately all boiling down to this reality that, let me quickly also just say that Tariq, my husband, wanted, in the end, wanted to share this story because it is so important for future birthing partners who are not the birther to understand, you know, from that support perspective as well. So he sends apologies. But ultimately, I think the thing that got me, and I'll explain in a second, around birthing at home, and the first time, so I've given birth twice now. I've had 2 full-term pregnancies and given birth twice, and both at home, both kind of very, mostly autonomous. But the first time, because like the crux of it is that because we did not grow up with birth as much as it used to be done some generations ago, where birth was much more common for young people and everybody to be around and attend and even have as part of a conversation. Birth I was very disconnected from the process of birth, and I felt like it was happening to me. And so birthing, when the surges were coming, when as the waters were breaking, everything was like, what the hell is happening to my body? And there was a subtle, like a very soft state of shock, full acceptance, and like so happy, like this means I'm not going to be pregnant anymore. And it's so hectic being pregnant. And so much joy and all of that hormonal stuff. But the shock of it is what made it a traumatic experience for me, going through the birth the first time, because my body was in so much pain during those surges. And the what do we call it, like the antenatal classes that we'd been attending around hypnobirth, we didn't discuss pain in that way. It was like, hypnobirthing is an amazing method to work with pain and understand pain, but it was never actually stated that pain is present. And so we weren't prepared at the level of pain that was coming. And so when the decision, when I fell pregnant the second time, which was not, intended, and after I'd given birth the first time, I remember saying that I never want to do that again. This is not an experience that I want to have again. And there was agreement in the room. And so because that traumatic experience had been shared, and so they were witnesses to that. And so when it happened again, the decision, because I was also really ready to not be pregnant and, deal with the not being pregnant. And that all kind of paths to not be pregnant were blocked. And so this, the pregnancy was certain. I was going to have a baby, should I carry full term. And the only way I could do that, and the only way I could work through that trauma, was to do it completely myself. Because even though I had a home birth, and even though it was tender and it was wonderful, it was 36 hours of being in this state of fright, and being completely at the mercy of my body, doing all these things that this person who was about to exit into this world was kind of behind. And so I was happy to be at full mercy, but the midwife that we employed, there was some kind of cross communication, because as my body was surging and as the pushing was happening, which of course you don't have control over, it's completely, it happens to you. I was told to not push and to stop. And that just blew in that moment of like, you're in the state, and literally was like moments from giving birth and then being told that I wasn't ready because I was apparently not dilated enough. Made no sense to me, because it wasn't me controlling it. So now I have to use all my energy to stop that process, which exhausted me to the point that I was like, okay, fine, then I'm not going to do this anymore. And I had nothing left inside me, and I was ready to meet my maker, and I was so exhausted and so tired and absolutely nothing left, that I had to just go into myself and be like, I'm so ready to die now. I'm so ready to be done with this. What do I have that can pull me through this? Because if I don't do anything, I will. I feel like I'm going to die now, which, as we know, also once you start understanding birth and so on, you know that you're moments away from the moment. But because of the level of exhaustion, and because I have another experience of that now, it was so unnecessary to have gone that way. But if I didn't go that way, I would not have been able to have the very beautiful moments with my ancestors that came to me at that time to pull me through it. Specifically my auntie who passed away a week before. And so those moments, of her holding my hand, her spiritual hand holding my hand, telling me, my baby, come, you can do it. We can't wait to meet this baby. We can't wait to meet this baby. Come. And having that kind of infiltrate the rest of me, my physical self, that I was like, okay, sweet. If we're going to do this, let's do this now, because mama needs to sleep or die, one of the two. And so getting up and birthing the baby, the freedom of that, but wrapped up in this tension and this feeling of being so disempowered, was crushing. And because it's also that feeling of, I know my body, and I know, there's such an inherent knowledge and wisdom. But because someone who's more learned than me and who has way more experience in this as me is telling me something else about my body, this dissonance that happens becomes a massive, instead of it being a crack, it just became this huge thing that I had to process. It had to take time. And if I didn't get pregnant the second time and have to, so soon after the first time, and have to plan to do this again, I don't think I probably wouldn't have done it again if it didn't happen unintentionally, getting pregnant. But it was the deciding factor that I didn't even want someone who was more knowledgeable than me, because ultimately I know my body better than anybody. And it's, I can learn, because I have that experience. I can learn about what I need to do for the next time. And vrachtig, that's what it was. And so going through that process, again, having to, convince beloved family that I wasn't putting myself and my unborn child at risk, because I myself, my body is considered a low risk body, even though it's also considered a geriatric pregnancy. There was little to no risk, and so it was good. And so for me to go into the system, into the medical system, or that industrial medical complex, would have been a risk for me. And so the process, I guess I could share a little bit about the process that I took to make that decision and what that meant for the next 9 months. Was to realize that I'm still not an expert, and that you do want someone there. And so to go to find people who are able to support your journey can be really difficult in the current climate of home births, because of this industrial insurance, because of the insurance situation. And so having kind of a backup hospital system. And so the option is obviously public hospital, which is wonderful, and it's great to have those options. But in the end, I realized that I didn't even want that. I wanted to just see this through completely, because if it was about the issues around my sovereignty and me being in such a privileged position, not just in terms of my economic, et cetera, status, but also being low risk, that this became some kind of, not that I was keeping data on it, but it became some kind of spiritual research and building proof for not just myself, but within the lines of inheritance, like for the ancestors that have done it this way in the past, and those that got kind of caught up in the hospital system. And then to all those who come after me, to have had done this became much more about that bigger community, and to show that there, is a way to do it. And people call it like wild birthing and free birthing, but it really just is like the OGest way of giving birth, right? And my process to do that was to viscerally and very deeply understand what my fears were and where they were coming from. And a lot of it was around, and I'm very good at this anyways, was worst case scenarios. Okay, what's the worst case scenario? We give birth to a baby who is alive and generally healthy, but maybe there is an issue that needs surgery. Okay, so then the fear is actually about money. It's not actually about the baby having a cleft palate or a hole in their heart or something. Okay, so let's kind of figure that out and maybe, figure some savings or something. But then let's actually go for the scan. I think we went for the 22-week scan. Because 13 weeks, I think it is, like doing Down syndrome and stuff, that wasn't relative for us too much. So we went for that 22-week developmental scan just to check those things, the fears about like cleft palate, etc. All the ventricles, chambers in the heart, perfect. Okay. Everything else doesn't matter. And so we only had that one scan. And, as I got later into the pregnancy, and it was like the end of my 40th week, I was like, oh, Yeti, maybe I must have another scan, because it's the deep heart of summer and I'm struggling emotionally as well. But we never ended up needing it, even though when we did call to potentially book it, there was panic on the other side of the line, because what? 41 weeks? No, I don't think. And going, like, dipping out into the world and hearing that panic and be like, yo, okay, that's not at all what I want or need in this right now. But the other fears was around, very honestly, it was around death. Was that baby could pass, first of all. Okay, if that happens, what is my process around that? What if, how are we going to deal with that, and how are we going to process our grief and our mourning and so on? And what's, one thing I'm really grateful for in my immediate community and in my family is that Islamically, you learn about grief and death and mourning from a very young age, and it's something that's so much a part of your culture. And so we can talk about it, and we can, even if it makes people very uncomfortable to speak about the death of a baby who is supposed to be the ultimate beacon of life. But we went through that process, and I had to sit my husband down and say, look, this is the protocol. If anything were to happen to this baby, this is what happened. This is what we do. We have to have the naming ceremony. You have to be buried with a name and all of, so we have to do all of that. And in the process of my death, this is what we will do. And that, I realized, speaking with people afterwards, is to face your death and to face the processes of life and death, which both of you know very well as birth keepers, is that line of birth and death is the same line. But a lot of people can't speak about that stuff. And I'm not saying that if you choose to free birth and you choose to do birth this way, that's what your journey is going to call for you. But for me, I needed very much to speak to that. And this is a process which ended up being a really beautiful conversation, because, relatively now, if I were to die prematurely outside of our expected lung lever, we have, we've been able to have that conversation now, as a union, as a couple. But yeah, and listening to many birth stories. I think I listen to hundreds. Every day I listen to about 4 or 5. And then trying to figure out, okay, where in the journey would I get stuck? What was emotionally very difficult for me? Okay, the pain. So let's think about pain, and let's talk about pain, and let's find podcasts around birth and pain. And it was very beautifully put for me. I forget what her name is, that Australian midwife. She's like super famous. But speaking about pain in terms of, you would never tell someone who runs a marathon that their pain is, that you want to kill their pain, or that their pain is not necessary, or you know, that it's, that you can cancel their pain and they can still run the marathon, which is, you know, this idea that we can make birth to be something so comfortable, and take, you know, the not the shame, but like the pity that we put on birthing people, and to just change the narrative to think about the pain as a vessel, and the pain as a means of gaining, to like gunning for the end of that finish line, and with the marathon, and that the body is so miraculous and marvelous that you can reroute the pain reception. And so, you know, just squeezing down on a hair comb made it so doable. It took away the distortion of the pain, like the peaks of pain, so immediately that I could do it. And I could, there's a contraction, like resurging down 2 minutes, about 30 seconds, whatever it was, and then fine again, 100%. Whereas before, because the pain could peak so high, between surges, I couldn't even catch my breath. And that's also what was adding to that exhaustion. And so this time I had a method. And yeah, so the one big thing that kind of led, because I am someone who lives very intuitively and has a relatively calm life, which I've worked very hard to have. I mean, calm with context of having a toddler and a almost toddler. But one of the big things that was like staring me in the face and having lots of dreams about and downloads about was the fact that our birth stories are so enwrapped in this system that comes from somewhere else, and is not our stories of birth, and is not our ways of birthing, that all the medicines around birthing, all the support mechanisms around birthing and pregnancy, this whole thing, pregnancy, breastfeeding, and birthing, and maybe breastfeeding, but like this whole time, baby time, all of that stuff was missing, like the indigenous ways of knowing around pregnancy, birth, postpartum. Even though it used to be such a, you know, such a big thing and such an obvious thing, it was very clear that you had to go into very particular places to find that knowledge. And a lot of the times that knowledge didn't even have women in that space anymore. It was kind of governed by men, which just felt so, I don't know, separate. Like there was a whole other layer, like the complexities of where all this knowledge had gone was so shrouded in all this mystery, and you know, there was something not right. And so I started on this research journey of finding out what those medicines were and started planting all of those plants in the garden and using those plants in that process. And the stark difference between birthing, let's talk about it, like the pregnancy into birthing process of this journey with Abdurrahman, with the second baby, than it was with the first is vastly different. And I mean, my first pregnancy also was 36 hours. Second pregnancy was 3 hours. But I also realized that because I was so in my body and I was so dependent on myself, I actually think my birthing process started around 6 months, because the contractions came from then, like that surge started. They call it Braxton Hicks or whatever, but it is the same, like giving birth. And so that when it finally did happen, I was in denial that I was giving birth, because even though I saw in my mind, I felt my cervix open in like quickly, like dilate. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, there's one of the truths around the whole thing was that there's so much to be said about that inherent trust that you have for yourself, and the fact that no one backs you up around that. You have to fight for yourself and Even be able to listen to what that voice is, you know, and trust the power, because it sounds supernatural and it sounds like woo-woo and whatever, but the basic truth of it is that we, you know, we've been doing this for millions of years, and that inherent knowledge and that voice in your head and that intuition and all of that stuff, that is a basic necessity for surviving in this world. And so when a medical industrial complex takes that away from you and tells you, no, that's not true, you have to remember that it is. And that's very hard to do. And that's why these stories are so important, right? We have to share, and we have to, yeah, keep that communication open when people have these questions, and be happy to share, because these stories are hard to find otherwise.
Gosh, I'm just getting goosebumps because you've really encapsulated what your process needed to be. And I just maybe want to ask around, in the aftermath of these two experiences, saying you know, your family's well-intentioned concerns were just based in fear and the unknown. What has been their response since?
So the fear, all that stuff was completely fine, 100%, until we started hitting stupid, what do they call it? EDD, estimated due date. What a crock of rubbish. Because mine was set at, I think mine was 37 weeks or something crazy, from that 22-week scan. But I carried until 41 weeks. And so I should never have said due date is this, mommy and cousins and aunties, because that's when the things start falling apart. So they tended to be supportive and with me and everything. But then when that due date started going past, and now we way beyond that due date, now it's a month past that due date, then the concerns and so on came. It was so funny also because that morning conversation, when I called Ruth, be like, yo, man, what did they say? Why is it dangerous to have to, you know, go so long over? And I know in Mexico it's 43 weeks and in France it's 42 weeks, but why? And in Vrachtag I was feeling that way because it was the day that the baby was coming. And Ruth really helped me so much to understand that it's not your fear. It's that you are holding on to other people's fears, which is such a process that we must learn often. But they've been, I mean, I think they wouldn't even bat an eye if I were to fall pregnant again and do this again. They'd be like, okay, cool. Do you want us to fetch the boys? Do you need anything else? But I have to say my husband's mother, they're also kind of more, I mean, not old school, but more old school in the sense. And so she was like, yeah, no, go for it. You know, there was no question about it. I think she also was like, we didn't even go for scans, just, you know, trust, big on trust. And so the fears and that the resistance was definitely from my family out of their fear, but because of a deep love for me and not wanting to disrupt the life that I had built and the family that was coming. So they're just 100% on board now. I don't know if anybody else would do it this way. I'm sure they'd still go to hospital, but hopefully the next generation can see that it's possible.
Thank you so much. I mean, what I really take away from your sharing is not that there's a specific way to do this, but that you found your way of doing it, and that there was basically in the first journey, well, there was what I get is that you were kind of discovering something old, because as you said, it wasn't a culture that you had grown up in. So it was also kind of having to rediscover all of that. But part of what you rediscovered was that it didn't work if your voice got squashed. And so what I really take away from your sharing is that the second pregnancy was really a process of deepening that honoring of your inner voice and understanding of what it was that you wanted and you needed, and you really did follow that, even though it was challenging at times.
Yeah, absolutely. it's that thing of, and then only afterwards, when I started that journey, I didn't go into the second time knowing that I'm doing it like this because I was so disenfranchised. Only afterwards, it's like, oh, yeah, but actually that's what it was. That's what it was. I was disempowered. And that feeling of disempowerment, I mean, just growing up in apartheid and you know, all the traumas that we inherit from the way the world is, you know what that feels like. But when it comes so hidden like that, when you feel like, you know, I paid for the service, I did it this way because I didn't want to do it in that traumatic hospital way. But the trauma followed because that system followed, you know, and the usurping of knowledge when the birth keeper knows better than you about your body, even whatever, the dentist, the gynecologist, the whoever, the caregiver, the carekeeper that you are going to for your needs is not listening to you or trusting you or allowing you to know about your own body, that's a very, you know, clear sign that that's a disempowered space, and that's not the kind of space I want to be in, you know, ever again. But you don't know that until you're there, you know, like, oh snap, that's what it was. Okay. My poor sister who was here with us, like, you know, I hope I haven't ruined her chances of wanting to have a baby, because she was traumatized, so traumatized by that. But I think, you know, having understood like the second baby, sure, second born, say I'm also second born, but this one he's come out to set us all straight. This one is not taking any prisoners, and I feel partially responsible for that, because this one came through without any blocks, just came through. And so there's a very kind of, yeah, we're seeing the power now.
Yeah, dismantling the rules of the structure. And you have to, like, you cannot do the same thing and expect a different outcome. Like,
Totally.
to make these changes, like, somebody has to do the work. And I mean, I don't know if you find it, but many of the women we've spoken to have been the pioneers, have been the first in their circle, in their family, and the ripple effect that it's had is incredible. And like you say, you know, you hope your sister isn't traumatized by it, and it's up to her to choose, you know, if she ever decides to embark on this journey, what is the work that she's willing to take on.
Yeah, and it's a perfect representation of how, you know, being a parent will change you, and it will fetch all that stuff that you refuse to deal with and that you didn't even know you're dealing with, and bring it to the fore. And so having such an empowered process, even the first one, because there was also a sense of independence. Like, you know, we said no to a lot of things that the midwives strongly suggested we do. And so there was resistance there still, but I mean, slowly bringing these things into light is, I think, part of my, what's the word, like the things that you carry on your back for the world, like part of the duty to process for my community and for my world, and healing, for the like deep healing that this stuff brings about, you know, and making those choices, and that ricochet, or that effect, like you say, into spaces that you don't even realize it goes into. And especially, I mean, especially with the plant medicine stuff, the fact that that stuff is so hidden, and to have seen how a lot of it works is, and that there's everything you need, you know, in the world, but you have to, the fact that we have to relearn all of this stuff while also growing a human, hopefully not in the summertime for most people, but yeah, it's a lot that you have to carry. So you have to deal with it. It forces you to deal with all the small cuck and all the things, so that when the parenthood time comes and they get older and older, you are more prepared, and you are more willing, and you have more kracht and gees to do so.
Well, yeah, thank you so much. I think our time has come to an end. I'm really looking forward to sharing this one next month. I really love how well you've encapsulated all of that. And yeah, I'm sure we're going to get a very positive response to your sharing. It's been incredible to see the impact that these talks have had on other people. Thank you so much,
It's such a pleasure.
from Ruth
People
and I.
wanna-
Yeah.
I'm happy to also be here if people have questions and
Okay,
stuff.
great. That's always lovely to know. Thank you. Yeah.
Mm.
Thanks.